On today's podcast, Mark Stufflebeem. Mark is a retired naval aviator, having flown both F-14s and F-18s. He's a Top Gun graduate and two-time weapons school instructor. He also spent time working on the ground in Afghanistan supporting special forces. Nowadays, he flies for a major airline, competes in triathlon, and contends with beach volleyball jokes on a regular basis. Enjoy the conversation. Mark, good evening. Welcome to the podcast.
Good evening, or good afternoon from the colonies.
Yeah, we're in different time zones, which is all very exciting for our first podcast to have somebody from so far away. And I'm going to jump straight into calling you Stuff from now on, because you've confirmed already that your Navy call sign is perfectly acceptable. And as it is way cooler, we're going to go with that, if that's all right.
That's what they say. Sure, sounds good.
Okay. I'm just going to explain to anyone listening why at one point in time you and I were in a similar sort of place and how my trajectory went differently to yours. So there would have been a point in the late 1980s where we would both have been teenagers, because we're similar in age, and we would have both have also seen Top Gun and wanted to fly jets. The way my trajectory went after that is not quite as cool as yours. I dropped out of school, went to the Royal Air Force, who said, go away, you should have stayed in school, kid. They went down the road to the Navy, and the Navy said, we don't mind so much. I'm not sure they had a shortage at that point. They said, in fact, we might even better get you through university and sponsor you and all sorts of stuff. And they sent me on a character and leadership course, which involved running around the woods, as I recall. And then somehow, I'm not even sure how this happened, I ended up having a couple of flying lessons in a Cessna off the back of that. And then they said, sorry, it turns out that you are too tall. Well, not too tall, actually. They said you are tall enough that you can't fly jets because your legs will be trapped inside the plane if you have to eject, and we don't like doing that to people. You could fly helicopters, but you're too tall for a jet. Not wanting to fly helicopters, I gave up on that dream and then waited 30 years, bought Maverick's motorbike, which sits behind me, and a Top Gun mug, which I'm drinking from, and there endeth my Top Gun story. Yours went in a slightly different way. Tell me your slightly cooler version of the Top Gun story.
Yeah, I will. But first, wasn't Airwolf enough to inspire you to want to go be a military helicopter pilot or Blue Thunder?
Do you know what? That's a really good question, actually. And it would have been the thing that put me off. And funnily enough, this has kind of gone full circle. When I was a kid, we'd just come off the back in the UK of the Falklands War. So as I was a sort of young teenager, that was militarily, that was what was going on, or just wrapped up at least. And Prince Andrew had famously flown helicopters in the Falklands War. And it just never struck me as very cool that someone from the royal family was just kind of flying these things and yeah, very, very, very bravely and so on at the time, I'm sure. But it just didn't have the same kind of appeal that Stringfellow Hawk might have inspired in me. So no, basically Prince Andrew put me off the whole helicopter experience. So no, Roy Schneider, whizzing around in Blue Thunder, that would have done it for me. Prince Andrew didn't. And nowadays, obviously, I'm probably joined by many in regarding Prince Andrew as not being a huge role model. So it's taken me 30 years, but I finally been proved right.
Right. All right. Well, back to your question. So I believe the Top Gun first movie came out in 1986, right? Yeah. So I think I was in 8th grade. I'm 1 year older than you, roughly, give or take. But yeah, it was like 8th grade when that movie came out. But I was and of course, the movie came out and everyone loved it. And, my friends are like, oh, that looks really cool. But it's a little bit thing that's different about me is I came from a Navy family. My father was a Navy pilot, flew in World War II and Korea. I had an older brother, much older than me, who had already been flying F-14s and had already been a student and had graduated from Top Gun before that movie came out. So I already knew all about it. And the movie came out. I'm like, it's still awesome. I want to do that. But I'd already kind of joined that. I don't know. I'd already kind of started down that path of wanting to do that before everybody else jumped on the bandwagon.
Actually, that's interesting because for a lot of people, I mean, the UK might be slightly different, but we knew nothing of that world until that movie, really.
Yeah, most people did not, I'm sure.
Was that the same in the States? I mean, was it a thing that suddenly became the cool thing to do after then?
Oh yeah, because I remember I had like an Adidas warm-up jacket, a crappy tracksuit kind of jacket. But my brother had got me all the patches, the F-14 triangle patch, the little cartoon cat patch, ships, and my, a set of wings with my name on it. He had it custom made. So I had all these patches, right, for a flight jacket on this Adidas tracksuit jacket. I'd wear it to school. And my friends are like, whatever, that's kind of odd, but you do you. And I'm like, oh, this is something I want to do. And I really love F-14s and my brother. And they're all like, okay, yeah. They didn't think it was cool. They didn't think it was uncool. That was just me being me, right? And they like, yeah, you do you, right? But then the movie comes out. Everyone's like, I want to go do that. And I'm like, hey, I've been singing this song the whole time, right?
That's very cool. Yeah, so suddenly you're the cool kid.
Yeah, I wouldn't even go that far, but yeah.
Okay, so your progression into that world was what did you do, and what did you end up doing in the Navy, at least?
I wasn't that great of a student up through 8th grade, but I had now solidified in my mind that that's what I wanted to pursue, was this career as a Navy pilot. So between my parents and I agreed I probably needed to buckle down and do better in school if I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. That was a very good step to meet that end. So we all agreed that I would go away to a military prep school for high school, which is not common. Most kids don't do that, but I went away to this military prep school. It worked out really well for me because I actually did really well there. That helped get me into the Naval Academy, I think. Also being a distance runner, I believe, helped a bit. I did well enough there at the academy to get a pilot slot, not by much, but and we may get to it later, but I also had some interest in special warfare. Knew nothing about the SEAL community before I went to Naval Academy. Once I got there, I started thinking maybe that's the path I wanted to follow. So I started following that path a bit. But the interesting thing is I didn't have the grades by the time I graduated to get a slot to go be a SEAL officer. So they said, what else would you like to be? I'm like, well, I came here to be a pilot. I'll be happy doing that. So I went off to go to flight school and never really looked back.
The higher grades were required to be a SEAL officer than to be a pilot.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
I mean, it all comes down to numbers. So before 9/11, the Naval Academy would get 16 slots per year to send a student to BUDS. That's Basic Underwater Demolition School in Coronado, where young men become SEALs. And so 16 billets, they called it, is the slot you're competing for. And I think there's about 1,000 kids for every graduating class from the Naval Academy. So, and not everybody wants to do that, of course, but I think there was maybe 90, 95 of us that thought we wanted to do that. And they put you through a lot of training and difficult stuff to see if you really have what it takes to make it through if you were to go to BUDS. So I think by the time they finished all that training, there were 26 of us left. So 26 of us were qualified to pick that slot. And they line you up in this giant line according to your class rank, number 1 through 1,000. And you're in this line. I was number 535 out of 1,000. So right dead in the middle of the class. And those 16 slots to go be a SEAL had already come and gone. I was like number 21 out of the 26 of us. So couldn't go do that. But I'm like, that's all good. I initially came here because I thought I wanted to go fly jets. And I'm totally happy doing that too. So, and they were still, I think I was like the 126th guy out of 135 to get a pilot slot. So I barely got the pilot slot. So I was lucky enough to get a pilot slot, and I went to Pensacola, Florida and Texas to go through flight school.
That sounds like the most kind of nerve-wracking game show ever, where they're just sort of working their way down a line, handing out the cool prizes.
Oh, yeah.
And you were just thinking,
yeah,
please still be, because in my mind, you're 500, and I don't want to be rude, but 530 odd or whatever you said is actually below average.
Yeah. Yep, it is.
So you must have been thinking, are there going to be any flight slots left by the time they get down to me?
There actually was a computer program online that showed you where your relative position was,
Right.
which sounds crazy looking back because computer technology, back then was so archaic. But there was this program you could log online and kind of see roughly where. So you kind of already had a pretty good idea how it's going to shake out.
Okay.
But I was sweating it. I was like, man, I hope I get a pilot slot because I don't want to go to a ship. It's funny because you figure the Navy, most officers are going to go serve as an officer on a ship. But most of them at that school don't want to go do that. They'd rather go do something else, of course, that seems cool, or I got lucky. Better lucky than good, we always say.
And so off you go to flight school, and your dream, actually, you say your older brother flew F-14s. And also, I should point out, for anyone who's not a Top Gun geek like me, F-14s that's the plane from Top Gun. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So that's your dream is to fly that, but going to flight school and that flying an F-14 that's not a certainty at that point. You're going to fly something,
right?
But not necessarily that.
Yeah, you have to compete every step along the way. So you start off in a little turboprop called a T-34. You can Google it. It's a syllabus with 40 flights, something like that. A lot of academics, some simulators. All this and that. So everything is graded and you're ranked against your peers every step along the way. And so when you finish that syllabus, and we called it primary flight training. So when you finish primary flight training, depending on your grade point average, once again, they line you up in a line, and you're not standing in a line. It's all done kind of on paper, but you're assigned, your number one or your number, I don't know, maybe 25 kids might graduate each week or something like that. So if you're somewhere between 1 and 25, and you're given a piece of paper, you put your desires of, I want jets, or I want props, or I want helicopters. Those are the three choices. And you put your choices down and you submit those. And the Navy says, well, this week we need so many jet slots and so many prop or fixed wing propeller plane pilots, and then this many helicopter pilots. And so you're hoping that there's enough jet slots that you can get one. And some weeks the Navy says, sorry, folks, we don't need any jet pilots this week. Or we have all jet pilots this week. So again, it's better lucky than good, but I did well enough that I got a jet slot. And then when you get to jet school, so now you're flying a different aircraft, and same thing, there's a syllabus, and you start off with simulators and academics and tests. And then you start flying the aircraft, and there's probably 50 or 60 flights, and you're graded in every single thing. And same thing, when you finish that syllabus, now it's like, okay, the Navy needs, it might be 8 kids that graduate, every 3 weeks or 4 weeks. It's like the Navy needs 2 F-14 pilots and 3 F-18 pilots and 1 EA-6B Prowler pilot and 3 S-3 Viking pilots. And you're like, well, I really want to fly F-14s. That's kind of why I'm here. I'm hoping I get that slot. And I didn't smoke the program. I was not impressing anybody too much, but I did just well enough to get one of those F-14 slots. So I feel very fortunate, lucky that it all worked out the way I'd hoped it would.
Yeah, you got to be lucky and then lucky and then lucky all the way down.
Yep.
Also, you're
not kidding.
This is 8 years after Top Gun. Is surely, in my mind, everybody on that program wants to fly F-14s, or is that not quite the case?
Well, so backing up a step, the breakout between jets, because you got the jet pipeline, you got the prop pipeline, you got the helicopter pipeline. In general, the top third go jets, the middle third go props, and the bottom third go helicopters. But there's a lot of helicopter pilots, if they're watching this, are shaking their fist. And I have some good friends that did very, very well and graduated number one, better than me in some cases, and wanted to fly helicopters. And of course, they put that as number one on their dream sheet. Everybody else is like, thank you for taking this bullet for us. But in general, most people, I think, wanted to fly jets. And then, so that's roughly how it would work out, and there's tons of prop pilots out there that are way better pilots than me, tons of helicopter pilots out there that are way better pilots than me. I feel bad for them. And again, I was lucky. But then once you're in the jet pipeline, how many of them really wanted to fly F-14s versus, say, F-18s? I don't think that's as given as you would think, given that this is 1996, 97 now time frame. This is about 10 years now after the movie came out. Yeah, there was some of those peers of mine were very inspired by that movie. Maybe that's why they were there. But you got to realize that a lot of these people are very pragmatic. They're very smart. And they already saw the writing on the wall that the F-18 is newer. It's going to be around longer. You might get more flight time in it because it doesn't break as often. So people thinking along those lines were already thinking, I'd rather fly F-18s than F-14s because it's a smarter career move to do that. I was like, screw that, man. I want to fly that beast.
Yeah.
I was not smart, and it was not pragmatic. And I just, the emotion and the passion for that airplane was what drove me. And again, I feel lucky that it worked out.
No, indeed. In fact, one thing that we spoke, because we chatted last week, and one of the things that I said to you, that when I did my flying lessons in my little Cessna, it was a bit underwhelming, and I literally had to come home from those lessons and jump on a motorbike and go ride my motorbike to get the adrenaline out and to do something a bit more exciting. And you were saying how some of your kind of early lessons in regular planes, inverted commas, were not overwhelming, certainly, but getting in that F-14 for the first time. And again, when you're flying the F-14 on your own for the first time, there's no other pilot because the guy behind you isn't a pilot. So you've flown it in a simulator, I'm guessing, over and over, but that's your first time in it. Flight number one in an F-14, you're in control of it. There's no one else. No one's going to help you out if it's not working. What on earth is that like?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, yeah. So going back to what you were mentioning about being underwhelmed with your first flight. So that T-34, the turboprop that they teach us in, those flights were underwhelming, like you say. I wasn't into motorbikes, but I'd go windsurfing after work to get that adrenaline rush that I seem to need in this life. Flying the T-34 was not it. And then getting into jet school and flying T-2s, that was more exciting. You're wearing all the gear now. You've got the helmet and the torso harness and a G-suit, and you're strapped into ejection seat with a parachute. That's the real deal. And so you feel like, hey, this is like kind of cool stuff. And it was much more exciting. And then the T-45 was even more high performance. But yes, the first flight in the F-14 was orders of magnitude higher on the Richter scale, with excitement. It's just an extremely powerful airplane. They're gone now. We retired them in 2006. I was in the last aircraft carrier to deploy in that aircraft. But yeah, the first flight was phenomenal. Yeah, we've done, I don't know how many hours, probably 50 hours of flight time in the simulator at that point. So all the procedures, what happens if the engine catches on fire. In your mind, you're supposed to jump right into action and handle the emergency. So you've got all that figured out. But like you say, and to be honest, the first two flights you go on, they do put a pilot instructor in the back seat, but he can't do anything because he doesn't have flight controls back there. He's still got the radar scope that Goose has and Tim Robbins, right? He can't fly you out of any trouble, but he can yell at you because he knows what he would be doing if you're in trouble. He's like, hey, idiot, with your right hand on the flight stick, that's the one. Yeah, pull on that. The trees get smaller. Push it forward. The trees get bigger, right? So he's a pilot and can talk to you about pilot stuff. That's the first two flights. And then flight 3, now you have a career Rio who's an instructor who knows how to, they're like the horse whisperer, right? They're the pilot whisperer. They've never been a pilot, most likely, but their career profession has been in the backseat operating the radar, but they've flown with enough pilots, especially knucklehead students, that they kind of know what the common mistakes are. They can help you out too, but it's all verbal help. There's no flight controls back there. The only controls they have is the yellow and black handle. They pull that. That's the last ditch. Things are really going sideways. That's their one control, is to pull the handle to get you both out.
Actually, I was going to ask you about the Rio. So the Rio, that's your radar intercept officer.
Perfect.
I guess this question must cover quite a bit. Are those guys, and I don't want to offend any, are they ones that wanted to be pilots and couldn't be? Does anyone sign up to be a radar intercept officer? Or are they literally, like Goose in the film, guys that wanted to be a pilot and it didn't work out?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think for 95% of those folks, and we call them NFOs, the general term for them, I would be called a naval aviator. They would be called a naval flight officer, NFO. So that's the broad title for their position. And their wings are slightly different shape, the way the anchors are. So you can see one walking through a bar and be like, oh, that guy's an NFO, or oh, that guy's a pilot. Most of them probably wanted to be a pilot and had poor vision. That's most of my peers, most of my friends that were Rios. They were probably smarter than me, probably be better pilots than me, but unfortunately they were not blessed with 20/20 vision, and therefore the Navy said, "Hey, you can go be, you can go NFO and compete for a slot to fly whatever airplanes happen to have the need for a naval flight officer, or you can go drive ships or go be a Marine or do something else." That was their option. And they compete too. They go through a syllabus of flight training. It's different than our flight training with what they actually are doing. They're learning more about the theory of intercept, talking on the radio, operating radar, those types of things. But it's very similar in respect to they have to compete for every step along the way. So they compete to get jets or props. Helicopters don't have any NFOs. Helicopters have 2 pilots that sit up front, and that's it. They don't have any dedicated officer that's operating sensors. They might have some enlisted folks in the back that are operating listening devices or something crazy, but those are not naval flight officers. But there are propeller planes out there that have dedicated like navigators and those types of things. And then there's jets. And in my time frame, there was like 3 or 4 different jets that required a NFO, a naval flight officer. Now, I think out of most of them, I believe most of them probably did want to go fly the F-14 because it was certainly the coolest thing for them to fly in as a naval flight officer. The other aircraft, not as interesting, I would imagine. Again, if they're out there shaking their fist, apologies. And we have great love for our RIOs, and especially our community. They were integral to our mission. They were as important on every flight as the pilot, and in some cases more important, especially when we started learning how to drop bombs and do close air support, working in close proximity to friendly troops on the ground, guiding laser-guided bombs to a spot of laser. That's the RIO in the back seat is operating this little joystick that's controlling the laser, and that's where the bomb goes. So at that point, the pilot becomes administrative, and we're just the bus driver. Well, that guy's driving the bomb and making it hit the target. So in those missions, the RIO was much more important than the pilot. We were just the stick monkey to put the plane in the right piece of sky so that the bomb could see the laser, those types of things. So we were very protective of our RIOs. And when the F-18 guys would make fun of us and make fun of the RIOs, that would sometimes get to fisticuffs at the pub because they didn't quite understand the necessity. Like, oh, we can do all this stuff by ourselves. I'm single seat. I'm in an F-18 Charlie, and I can lace the bomb myself, and I don't have a need for some helper in the back seat. And we would be like, no. Like, this is my bro. Like, these guys are as important as we are. So there was some community rivalry there, and we were very protective of our RIOs.
That actually came across better in the second Top Gun film. In the Maverick film, they really did show the guys in the back were doing something, as opposed to Goose, who just looked like he was kind of tapping on the fuel gauge and yelling about do some of that pipe shit. Yeah, so they kind of implied that. But I did wonder. Actually, you answered the question I had as well, which was, do those guys get to call themselves naval aviators and clearly not their naval flight officers? I wonder if walking into a bar, whether that kind of cuts as much mustard with the girls or
Yeah, I guess the funny joke that we all tell ourselves now is that the only people that are truly impressed by fighter pilots are Boy Scouts or other fighter pilots. So if you walk into a pub with, I don't know, your buddy or with your RIO, if you know how to talk to ladies, you know how to talk to ladies, and they're gonna like you because you're charming, not because of what you do. We kind of learned that. So I had RIO friends that did very well in that environment, and I had some pilot friends that were completely inept, and you'd call them a social hand grenade. So I don't think which flavor of wings you wore on your chest made too much of a difference in that regard, like maybe someone would think. Another funny story is you almost downplayed your job, and it became a funny game when I was a single guy to go out to the bars and come up with the most outlandish job. Like if a girl says, "Oh, what do you do?" If you were to say, "Oh, I'm a fighter pilot," if you're with a bunch of mates, they would like, like it was an eye roll and like, "Oh, you're a loser." Like you don't just pull out that card, the ace of spades, and throw it on the table right away. It was it was frowned upon. So you came up with the most outlandish story as to what your occupation was. Like, "Oh, we're dolphin trainers," or "we're rodeo clowns," or I was told somewhere in Texas that I convinced some group of pub goers that I was the tail gunner on the space shuttle.
No, that's funny because when I'm in the pub with my mates, if I dared describe myself to anybody as a YouTuber, I would get a slap around the head pretty fast. So it's not.
Yeah. same thing.
Yeah, indeed. Actually, your career flying F-14s, that took you literally to Top Gun, and this is this is curious to me because I worked in financial services, and when I went into financial services because the Navy didn't want me, I was going in there late 90s, and so it was just off the back of things like Wall Street, the movie and stuff, and we were just a kind of a group of well, actually we sounded a little bit like the way you kind of described yourself and your colleagues, in terms of, you know, group of young men all trying to kind of compete against each other and also enjoying their job and so on. And we were all obsessed with whatever movie was depicting what we kind of saw as our industry in the coolest possible way, which was actually very far removed from the reality of it. So we all thought we were in Wall Street. And I can remember, like, I bought my first fighter fax. People now have to go and Google what a fighter fax even was. But I was walking around in a fighter fax, and I thought I was Gordon Gekko. And it always I always wondered, you go to Top Gun, what's Top Gun the movie? What's its relevance, if any, at Top Gun? Is it like, because I wondered, do they almost ban you from even mentioning it, or do they embrace it and everyone's kind of quoting lines to each other?
Yeah, there's a couple of things about Top Gun and its similarity to the movie. One of the similarities is there is a place called Top Gun, and the second one is that they do fly airplanes there. That's about the end of the similarity. But
volleyball.
Yeah, I went through.
Please tell me there's volleyball.
All right. Oh, yeah. We lube each other up with baby oil and listen to Kenny Loggins music while we play volleyball. Yeah. Yeah. So it'd been 15 years, if my math is correct, when I went through the school from when the movie was released. So they don't mention it specifically. They don't give you protocols like, yes, you have to bow down to the movie, or no, you must shun the movie. It was kind of understood that, all right, it's been 15 years. You look back and there's parts of that movie that are still really inspiring and motivational, especially the flying scenes, even though they're nowhere close to depicting real aerial combat, but they look really cool. But the rest of the movie is so cheesy. You have to admit, like, it's laughable. You still love it, but it's cheese, right? It's just, that liquid cheese in an aerosol can that you spray onto a Triscuit cracker. So I think that's the opinion that most of us have. And we kind of would try to downplay it. And even like I said, there's this rivalry between the F-18 guys and the F-14 guys. And so maybe if a group of us from the Tomcat squadron would go into the ready room on the ship to brief a mission, in combat or whatever, and we happen to be briefing it in the Hornet ready room, if a group of us would walk into their ready room, they would cue up the Kenny Loggins music, and then we're all just like, okay, yeah, like, and then that joke would last for 5-10 seconds, and it dies down, and then we get down to the serious business of warfare, what we're going to go do, and then we're close mates, and we're all in it together, very professional, and then after the debrief, maybe someone would make a funny joke like, hey, so-and-so and Tomcat 3-1 made this mistake, and crash and burn. Someone might make a comment like that every once in a blue moon, but not all that often. When it came down to getting to work, our business is pretty serious business. We would party pretty hard and have a lot of fun because we all loved what we did. Everyone's kind of the alpha wolf in the room, so you have a whole pack of alpha wolves. It's tricky, but everyone checks their ego at the door when it's time to brief the mission, to go execute the mission, come back and debrief the mission. It's all business. So any reference to a movie in that environment was kind of considered a faux pas. So it really wasn't, until after everything's said and done, that kind of stuff would come out. But most of us kind of downplayed it. Everyone had seen the movie probably, 20 times. So everyone knew it line for line, of course, but you didn't really talk about it. You didn't embrace it. You didn't shun it. It was just kind of hanging out in the background. And every now and then someone might make fun of you for it.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. You make me feel very childish now, because I had a big poster of Gordon Gekko and the entire "Greed is Good" speech written on it, slapped up on the wall behind my cubicle in my financial services office. I thought you'd tell me that you had a big Top Gun poster on your wall, but you sounded like far more professional than I ever was.
Well, I spin a volleyball on my finger in my spare time.
I was talking to some guys on Instagram and mentioning I'm talking to you and saying what are the questions that, because I've heard so many pilots on podcasts talking about really kind of complicated stuff that I don't understand. I find fascinating, but I just thought there might be some kind of questions that people that know nothing about this subject might have, and actually might therefore be more interesting in a way. So here's a few that got thrown off me. First one is call signs, which actually I want to know about. So your call sign is Stuff, which clearly comes off of your surname. And in fact, you said your dad's call sign was Stuff. Actually, was that your older brother as well? Did it pass down?
No, elder brother's call sign was Boomer Stufflebeem. Yep.
And so, am I right? You don't choose your call sign; you're given it. If you get given a lousy one, can you appeal that process? Is it like Hogwarts and the hat? I don't know how does it work.
If you get given a lousy one and you try to protest, it's sticking even harder, like super glue. Like if you allude to the fact that you don't enjoy being called that, everyone's going to call you that even more. So that doesn't work. Now, the way it works is you earn a reputation, maybe in flight school, usually from doing something stupid. That's how most call signs come about, and people just start kind of calling you this or that. And then you go through training to fly the aircraft you're going to fly in the fleet. So in my case, again, lucky to get F-14s. I go through VF-101, the Grim Reapers. That's a squadron that teaches all F-14 air crew how to operate that aircraft. And then during that tour, maybe you did something really stupid, or you blew some tires, or you did, I don't know, something silly out of the pub or something silly in the airplane, and then that would kind of stick with you. But it's not till you arrive at your first, we call it a fleet squadron, your first 3-year, you're on a 3-year set of what we call sea duty orders, where you're going to this one squadron, and that is your home for 3 years, whether they're deployed or stateside or somewhere in between. You're there for nearly exactly 36 months. When you first check into that squadron, you might have some mates that were maybe a few months ahead of you that have joined that squadron, and they already know who you are. And maybe you already have a reputation, whether it's good or bad. But that's the point where your call sign is really solidified. And they have all the JOs, the junior officers. These are you would call them lieutenants. The lieutenants and below convene a board, and they call it a call sign review board. And they take it, it's fun game, but it's serious, where they come up with a call sign review board, and they sit down in the ready room. They put up on the whiteboard, all these, okay, here comes Mark Stufflebeem. I knew him from flight school, and we partied together in college, or they know who you are probably. And they put a bunch of call signs up, and maybe there's some of the older guys that have never even heard of you, have never met you, and they might have their opinion because of your last name sounds like this, or they heard that you did this at a pub, or you did this in an airplane. So there's maybe 5 or 6 call signs that kind of get thrown up onto the whiteboard. And then this board convenes and they vote, and they say, nope, he's going to be this. And then they have to forward that to the skipper. That's the commanding officer of the squadron. And the commanding officer has to blast off on, okay, yes, that's acceptable, or that won't get me fired, at least not right away. But the skipper ultimately has the hammer on it, but it gets approved at that point. And then you show up, and they have a patch with your name and your call sign, and here you go. And that's what you get. And there's no protesting, and there's no recourse if you don't like it. Like I mentioned, if you don't like it, you better not let anybody know that you don't like it, because then it's definitely going to stick.
That's awesome.
And then it's pretty hard to get a different one. If you do something extraordinarily stupid, a big thing is like skidding an airplane off into the grass at the runway when we're operating ashore. Or if you blow tires out on the aircraft carrier, boom, boom is a very common call sign at that point, where they would convene an emergency call sign review board if you've done something egregiously stupid, either out, at the hotel, in the Mediterranean, during your deployment. If you did something really silly at the pub, or if you did something really silly in the aircraft, they might convene an emergency call sign review board and vote to change it. But it takes a pretty egregious act to have it changed from that point.
I was going to say, I love that it's that kind of the process is that there's like a review board to rename you something appropriate to the stupidity displayed. I mean, I thought it was a much more kind of casual process that it came about by. But
I will tell you this too. My peers in the Air Force, and I've got some good mates that were Air Force, maybe F-15 or F-16 types. But the Air Force, I don't know how they do it. And we make fun of them because they will be like, oh, skull crusher or laser or zap or something that sounds really cool. And you go into a Navy regiment and you've got weird acronyms like WETOD and Bling and Flounder and unbecoming names. And maybe if you know the story, there's an acronym behind it. They don't sound cool as Grimace. You know, if you remember, I don't know how popular McDonald's was in the UK in the 80s, but the big purple monster from McDonald's, Grimace, like this big fat blob that scares the crap out of children everywhere, right? Yeah, there's people call sign Grimace, like if you happen to be kind of tubby. It's not becoming, but the Air Force, somehow they have all these really cool call signs. So I guess they get to pick their own, or I don't know, but we always give them a bunch of crap for that.
Hey, you talk about blowing out tires, landing on an aircraft carrier. I've got a question for you that has come from Jen, my wife, and I'm getting that in early because I wouldn't want you to think I'm putting this question to you. You mentioned to me last time that when you were flying combat missions, and you were saying that actually one of the kind of toughest or the scariest part or the hardest part of that was landing back on the carrier at night. Like that process of landing on an aircraft carrier at night is not a straightforward process. You can be on a combat mission, and it's getting the thing back on the deck is a hurdle to overcome. And I was explaining this to Jen, and she said, why is it hard? Surely it's just a giant airfield, just happens to be on a boat. So I said, okay, I sort of rolled my eyes a little bit on your behalf and said, I'll ask him why it's hard to land an F-14 on a boat in the dark, because Jen thinks it's probably quite easy.
Yeah, no, it's very cliched, the whole combat versus coming back and landing being more difficult. It's very cliched, but it is true. And when I say combat, I have not ever engaged in aerial combat. I've never fought another aircraft in anger. All of my combat experience was flying over Iraq, enforcing no-fly zones, performing missions that are, air to ground, that regard. So those are not difficult. It's not easy, but it's not, it doesn't require, laser focus attention for, the entire 7 hours that you might be out. Maybe there might be 5 minutes of excitement during that 7-hour mission. But when you come back to the ship, your heart rate is definitely up. And I know during Vietnam, for those pilots that did, encounter air-to-air engagements with the Vietnamese pilots, they had heart rate monitors on some of those folks to record data and check their heart rate during a dogfight. And a lot of those guys came back to the ship and their heart rate was higher when it was time to land at the ship. And I believe it. So why is it so hard? So when you're flying, on an airline to come to New York City to go do a IROX event, and the pilot lands at JFK, John F. Kennedy Airport there in New York City, that's a 10,000 foot runway. And if you don't land exactly where you want to, it's okay. You've got another 9,000 feet to go, and those planes have really good brakes, and there's lots of room to slow down and stop well before you get to the end. Hopefully, right?
I'm not going to spill my peanuts sat in first class, am I? That's the bottom line.
Hopefully not. If they're doing their job right. So the 10,000 runway is kind of average. A lot of them are 8,000 feet when you land at a commercial airport. Some might be longer. Dallas, Texas, there's some 12,000 foot runways. There's a lot of room for error, meaning, and airline pilots are all pretty good. I've flown with, I am one. I fly with them all the time, and everyone lands pretty much where they want to. But it doesn't need to be super precise. Now, take the 10,000 feet, shrink it down to 800 feet. That is the landing area on an aircraft carrier. There's only 800 feet that you've got to land. And it's not just, you hit the last 799 feet. You're not going to stop at 1 foot. You have to land at a very certain spot to catch one of those 4 wires that then will stop you before the nose wheel runs off the end of that 800 foot landing area. So it's a very, very small area that you're landing on. And that's not the only issue. The issue is that the landing area is 10 degrees offset from the direction of the ship. So if the ship is steaming forward, which it usually is, your landing area is constantly walking sideways. So you're doing constant little wing corrections to make sure you're lined up correctly. And even more importantly than all of that is your angle of attack. And I don't want to get into a big pilot, physics lesson, but the attitude of the aircraft, like if it's too slow and steep, you run the risk of stalling, you run the risk of things hitting the back of the ship. If you're too fast or flat, the tail hook isn't dangling low enough to catch a wire. So you have to be at the exact right angle of attack, and you have to be at the right glide slope to catch one of those 4 wires. So there's a lot of moving parts, and it has to be extremely precise for you to get the tail hook into those wires exactly where you want to, and on center line, because you land, 40 feet right of center line, well, your wingtip's going to cut through 20 other airplanes that are parked out there, plus, all the sailors' heads that are standing up over there. So there's a lot at stake. And if you screw it up, there's a lot of people that could get hurt or killed, expensive machinery, airplanes, etc. So in the daytime, it's terrifying the first few times you do it, but it starts to get, in my opinion, it's pretty fun in the daytime. I think most of my peers would agree. It's a good time. It's like, it's still a challenge. Your heart rate's still up, but it's like, a good race. Like when you go out and have a good park run, it's slightly stressful. Your heart is amped up. You got a little bit of butterflies before the gun goes off. You're anticipating, a good performance, but then you go out and you do it and you finish and you feel great. That's kind of like day become traps. So you land on the ship. Day traps is like going out and having a good, park run. It's a good time. It's challenging, but it's a good time. Night traps are never a good time. There's a very small handful of people that are sadistic enough to lie to say that they enjoy them at night. But the difference at night, and you can tell Jen, that you can't see the rest of the world moving away from you or towards you. You have no peripheral vision. And I think that's the difference. Like you can't see all the little bits of the ship. You can't see the wake, the water moving, and all of that moving towards you. All you see are the lights. So you're looking at a handful of lights, and all of a sudden you crash onto the ship, and every landing feels like a crash. So you're looking at the lights, all these sets of lights and the things in your instruments to make sure that everything is going correctly. And all of a sudden, everything kind of crashes around you, and then you come to a stop. And you would spill your peanuts if you had some, because you're at 142 knots to 0 in about 1.5 to 2 seconds. So peanuts are flying. So it's the lack of depth perception that I believe is the big difference between the day and night landings at the ship.
My last question before we move away from your Navy flying, you explained to me when we were chatting last time just how physical it is to be certainly dogfighting in the plane. What if any physical training do they insist on pilots doing in between flying, if any? And you were doing a ton of sports stuff. Was that normal, or were you a bit of an oddball in doing that, and all your colleagues were just limiting it to volleyball and then back to the bar?
I have a feeling that the public perception of a military fighter squadron in reality is a bit different here. Everybody doesn't look like a GQ magazine model, in at least every squadron I was ever part of. It's a lot of average-looking blokes, to be honest. You have some people that are more athletic and pursue their own hobbies or interests or fitness at a higher degree. And then you have some, call sign Grimace, loves cheeseburgers and milkshakes and has probably never seen the inside of a gym. Now, the military has physical fitness requirements, but they're not very difficult. I know you've researched them for instance, like the police academy. I've seen your bit on that. Yeah. And the standard might not be necessarily high to pass. The standard to max it out might be pretty difficult, right? Same thing in the military. In the Navy, you have to run 1.5 miles every 6 months. And how many push-ups can you do? You'd call them press-ups, right, in 2 minutes. And then sit-ups. And then a sitting reach. You have to sit and touch your toes, which Grimace probably can't do, right? But that's it. And the standards are graduated according to your gender and according to your age. And just to pass is not very hard. So there's a lot of folks in the squadron that aren't necessarily fitness models. To answer your question about air combat and to do what we do in our job, to sit in a chair that flies through the air at Mach 1.6, 1.7, that in itself, it does not take a lot of physical fitness. Now, when you get into a fight, it is a very physical and violent, and much more so than they can possibly portray in Hollywood. in any movie that I've seen, at least, they can't capture how much the G-force kind of, how real that force is and how it instantly reduces your vision, and in some cases can knock you unconscious if you're not careful. They showed that in the second movie, right? That is real, but you don't necessarily have to be a fitness model to combat that, you know? And the funny thing is, Grimace, who might be fairly short and tubby, and has never done a chin up in his life, he's not necessarily going to pass out. It's actually the people that are short, that have a very short distance between their heart and their brain, and have high cholesterol and high blood pressure, are actually better susceptible to withstanding G-forces. Whereas I was an endurance athlete and I was interested in distance running and then eventually into triathlon, and I was doing that kind of stuff. And that was bad for my G tolerance. You know, I had low blood pressure, which is not what you want to have if you're flying in a high performance aircraft, because anytime you pull on the stick, everything starts at 6 Gs. Your head that weighs 25 pounds now weighs 150 pounds. All the blood cells that weigh, I don't know how much a blood cell weighs, but they all weigh 6 times as much. They're all going to start going down to your feet. And as you know, if you don't have any blood cells in your head, that's when things start getting gray and eventually you start going to sleep. So I had to fight really hard to prevent myself from graying out or blacking out in environments where Grimace might just be laughing and not doing anything at all to fight against those Gs, where I'm doing the anti-G straining maneuver. It's a breathing cycle technique that you have to do anytime you're pulling Gs. And I would do that sometimes even coming into land. Like you come in before you land, you do a 4 or 5 G turn before you do a kind of a 360 degree turn to land. And I would have to do this hook maneuver sometimes just coming into land. And the Rio is like, why are you doing the hook maneuver? All we're doing is landing. And I'm like, oh, you want me to stop? Oh, no, keep doing it if that's what you need to do to stay awake. Sorry, press on, right? And other guys didn't need to. But I was an outliner that I did probably work out more than the average kind of squadron. But when you're on an aircraft carrier for 7 months on deployment, you know, there's 4 gyms. Some people get really into weightlifting and get in better shape on deployment because you go and fly your missions and you watch movies in the ready room with your mates and go eat cheeseburgers in the wardroom, the cafeteria. You have some dead time. So some people take advantage of that and get in really great shape on deployment. Others take advantage of the cheeseburgers, and we call auto dog the self-serve soft serve ice cream machine. And it looks like dog excrement, right? When you pour it onto your bowl. Some people take advantage of the dog machine and the cheeseburgers are always available and never see the inside of the gym, and they come back from deployment in worse shape than they left. So there's a full spectrum of that too. But I always try to work out. I brought my tri bike in my stadium and set it up on rollers. I'd run on the treadmill, which is dreadful. I hate treadmills, but kind of had to if I wanted to stay in some sort of, you know, cardio dolphin shape, right? So yeah, I was a bit of an outlier in that regard, but I did have a couple of mates that were into some of the stuff with me. So we would be the guys who would kind of work out more, and that was our free time to go do that. You go to the gym, stay in shape.
Actually, it's interesting because my perception was that to be fit for what you need to get fit, but actually a lot of it just comes down to genetic predisposition, which actually applies to so much anyway. Yeah, no, that's actually my last question on your Navy stuff. You mentioned you're sometimes flying around for hours and hours and hours while you're up there. Are you able, and is there any, if you're just kind of flying, just going somewhere, and it's just you're just flying in a straight line for a long time, which you do now clearly as an airline pilot. Are you able to? Does the urge ever occur to just kind of muck about a little bit? Why? Because sometimes if I'm riding my bike and I'm just bored, I'll just kind of weave around, or I'll kind of nail it away from the lights. I'm just kind of mucking about. Can you? I mean, maybe this is a rather childish question. Can you just kind of muck about in your plane when you're going somewhere? Can you go upside down and just, that was interesting, or do you just sit there and just go to your next waypoint or whatever you're heading towards?
Yeah, you can. There's a bit of freedom to do that. Of course, the leadership would discourage that. They have a term for it called flat hatting, especially if you're doing it in close proximity to the ground. Like if you want to put on an impromptu air show for your family, over the beach, like, hey, be at the beach at 2:00 and I'm going to do some loop-de-loops. Like, I know some people would have been fired for that type of behavior, right? But if you're up at, you're off the ship, and you're hundreds of miles from all human life, and you feel like doing a roll or something. I remember as a younger guy doing that, and depending on who was in the back seat, because remember, you got the Rio back there at all times, and maybe it's one of your mates and your buddies, and you like to do that kind of stuff together, or maybe you got your skipper, your commanding officer in the back seat. You're not goofing around with him back there, right? But if it's my good buddy who's my roommate, and like, hey, look at this cloud. Let's see if we can chop this cloud in half by going through it and doing a loop across it. Like there's some freedom to do that. The older the aircraft, the more freedom you have. The newer the aircraft, the less, because the new aircraft, like a Tesla, is constantly transmitting every bit of data back to the mothership so Elon can gather it, to program more Teslas. These Super Hornets are constantly transmitting and recording every bit of data. So when you come back and land, they feed a computer chip into a maintenance computer. They can see. In fact, I know an individual that took a Super Hornet to a small local airport where he used to work as a high school kid. I'm not going to mention any names or locations, but this person took a plane to a small private civilian airfield and put on a little air show and did some touch and go landings in a Super Hornet, and then went back to his base and landed. And he was in a single seat plane, so there's no Rio or Wizard on the back seat. He's by himself, and he goes back, and the maintenance master chief downloads the file, and he's like, "Hey, Lieutenant, how many landings did you say you did?" Like, "Oh yeah, I just did one landing here, home base. How come the landing gear is registering 5 landing impacts?" And then they looked a little deeper and watched his. They were able to see it almost like Google Maps, see the snail trail where this plane went. Oh, it did some loop-de-loops. And so then he got called up, to talk to the admiral, and he was no longer flying Navy airplanes after that. So, yeah, the newer airplanes will tell on you. Just doing an aileron roll over a cloud when you're 900 miles offshore, no, I don't think anyone's going to care about that, right?
Yeah, no. I did wonder if the plane, certainly the newer planes kind of reported on you. So when you retire, and we never spoke about this last time. We almost forgot, or I certainly forgot to ask you about this. And I was going back through your initial email to me, telling me about what you'd been up to, and I remember thinking, oh my goodness, we never even got onto that. After you retired from flying in the Navy, you then did some stuff with the Navy SEALs on the ground in Afghanistan, wasn't it? We've not spoken about this. So what how did you get into that? And what were you doing? And how I was going to say, how cool was that? I mean, because it's one of those weird things where you're clearly, I mean, again, it's all business. You're in a serious place doing serious stuff. But I imagine with some interesting people, I mean, I don't know if how cool was that is even the right way to put the question, but hopefully you kind of get what I mean.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, first, I need to be 100% clear. I am not a SEAL. I have not gone through BUDS. I do not wear the Budweiser device that my friends that are of that ilk that they wear. I am not a SEAL, and they get very, not of me necessarily, but there are a lot of people out there that pretend to be SEALs or say that they were in a SEAL team. I try to make it very clear that I'm not. But I did go through a 10-week selection course, and by selection, the cadre says, look to the gentleman to your left, look at the gentleman to your right. In 10 weeks from now, 2 of them probably won't be standing here. So you're lucky if you make it through. So it was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was harder than going through the 10-week Top Gun course, harder than any of my training anywhere along the way. Physically very hard, of course, as you can expect. So I was qualified. So I guess I'll rewind. How did I get into this? So I had topped out kind of in my aviation career. I made commander 05. That's the 5th rank up on the rank structure for an officer of the Navy. But I failed to screen to be a commander of a squadron, which is a bit of a disappointment. I could say most pilots aspire to be the commanding officer of a squadron. Like that's your fiefdom. Those are the guys and girls that, that fly with you for that 3-year tour. It's a very enjoyable tour for those folks because they have a lot of freedom. I think probably less freedom these days, but to kind of mold the young officers below them and to build a fighting unit. I didn't get to do that, but I still had some time left to serve, and I was supposed to go to do something on sea duty, which was going to involve being on an aircraft carrier, but not as a pilot, which is not a desirable place to be. And I asked the person in charge of my career. I said, "Hey, I get it. You have to assign me somewhere. I have to go somewhere to do my sea duty, but I'm not interested in going back to an aircraft carrier if I'm not going to be in the arena fighting the fight. I'd much rather go do something more applicable." And they hear that from pretty much everybody in those circumstances. They hear it all the time. And my detailer, that's the name of this position for this. He's a pilot, but he works in the Pentagon for a stint, assigning, jobs, good deals or bad deals to people. He says, "Well, we've got this program where you sign, it's a 42-month set of orders, so like 3.5 years, where you have to go to language school, learn how to speak Dari, which is what they speak in northern Afghanistan. And you go through a lot of shooting training and some combat driving training and all this stuff. And you're probably going to be working with special operating forces, and you're going to deploy for 12 months on the ground in Afghanistan. And then you'll come back stateside for like a year or 10 months, I forget. And then you go back for 10 months to the same village. And you're kind of a liaison. You've got more cultural training than the fighting unit you're assigned to. So you're supposed to kind of make relationships with the Afghan village elders and the location and the village where you're assigned." And I said, "Yeah, put me in for that." And this detailer on the phone, I could kind of sense the shock. Like, "Wait, did you hear what I said? You have to go to Afghanistan for 22 months. I'm like, yeah, I'm interested in, I'd much rather do that than go be on a ship, pushing, a mouse around on a keyboard." "Wow. Okay, great. Yeah, let's get you signed up and we'll get you trained up and here's your orders." So they were excited that someone was willing to take this bad deal. But I was very interested in doing that because, as I mentioned earlier, while I was a student at the Naval Academy, I started learning a lot about special warfare. That's the community that encompasses the SEALs and some other special operating portions of the Navy. I was very interested in that. I felt kind of a calling to go onto the ground rather than seeing warfare from 30,000 feet. I wanted to go see what it was like at 0 feet above sea level, or above ground level. So I went through all this training and I deployed to Afghanistan for a year. And I wasn't assigned to special operations directly, but I had some friends from college that were in that community. And I started working in lanes parallel to them. And we started working together and they kind of adopted me. And so when I came back stateside, I was asked to join their unit, a SEAL command here in Virginia Beach. And I worked with them on programs that I can't really go further into detail about, but it involves somewhat of my language and some of the training that I've been going through. Even though I am not a SEAL, they still had use for me. And then when I deployed a second time, I deployed with them, and that fulfilled my obligation in this program for a 10-month deployment. And at that point, I was mentoring Afghan special forces, and because I could speak their language, I was kind of a force multiplier in my unit because I was someone that understood the Afghan perspective a little better than, even though some of my mates in the team had deployed there many times, but they didn't have the language training and some of the other things. So I was able to kind of find a niche where I was useful to both the Afghans and to my peers and the unit I was working with. So it was, you're going back to the question about, was it cool? Yeah, I guess it was, but you also mentioned it. This is serious stuff, and it absolutely is. There's not much joking around about Kenny Loggins and, going and eating cheeseburgers and eating, auto dog after a mission. You're living the mission, for the whole time you're on the ground. There's rockets coming in at night sometimes, we work at night, sleep during the day. During the day, might hear the sirens and the rockets coming in, or mortar. That's a little different than an aircraft carrier that's, comfortably parked in the Persian Gulf with many layers of protection. There's nobody that has any possible way of hitting it with anything. It's a totally different environment. And I made good friends with the Afghans. I made good friends with military operating forces from many countries. So it was a great experience for me, almost from a selfish perspective of gaining perspective on where I came from. A fighter pilot, they think that they're the apex predator, they're the T-Rex, in the jungle, and everything kind of revolves around them. And that was me. And then I shift into a different role and I'm seeing warfare from the ground. And every now and then you might need air support and you need cover. And maybe there's some Air Force F-16s that are on station that can provide some cover for this or that. And they're just a tool. And, oh, no, they ran out of fuel and we can't use them. Okay, we don't have that asset available. We're going to have to figure something else out. It's not, the world does not revolve around that, like you think it does when you're in that role. So I gained a lot of perspective, and most of my good friends were from my, flying days, and I still hang out with some of them here and have a pint every now and then with them. And they only have the one side of that perspective still. And they still kind of have this, I was the king, I flew, F-14s, F-18s, and strike warfare is what warfare is all about. And no, it's just one small piece of the puzzle, and sometimes not necessary. If you run out of fuel and can't help, okay, we'll get artillery from the Army guys to help us with this target. Okay, we can't use you. Great, we'll move on to something else. So you're not as important as you think. I think it was healthy for me to gain that perspective. And it is a very serious business. But you talked about the people. Yeah, phenomenal people. A lot of them, they don't like other people. They're very, kind of private and almost hermit-like folk. They don't like going out in public, other than the very few that write books and go on the news and blab about what they did. Those guys are instantly shunned from the community. Most of them are quiet, humble professionals that are extremely good at what they do. The training that they go through, you can't imagine. And you're an endurance athlete, which helps. And I was an endurance athlete, and I went through some of this training. And again, I went through a portion of what the real guys go through. Having that endurance background was extremely helpful, of course. And I went through the age, I think I was 40 years old when I went through that 10-week course. The next oldest guy was 8 years younger than me. But because I had such a strong running background, it helped kind of make up for my other weaknesses. But it's a very serious business and very serious guys. Now, there's some communities that have some women, which is great. And there's some roles that women are actually better than men. But I have not heard of any woman yet that's made it through BUDS. They have it open to women, but they haven't changed their standards. And they're just, it's available, but I don't know if any have done it. But the guys I worked with they're not crazy, but they're right there on the edge. And they mean business, and it's a good thing that we have guys like that out there. I'm glad that they're on our team. It was a good experience.
Yeah, and as you say, what a nice way to kind of wrap things up, having seen, as you say, combat, but from 30,000 feet to then be on the ground talking to the people in their language. I mean, it's about as but those 2 points are about as far removed as you could probably get from each other. So yeah, right. It as you say, gives you a great perspective on it. We're going to go on to what might be more boring in comparison, but probably more relevant to huge numbers of people. Commercial flying. You're a pilot. This is your day job is flying hundreds of people around to go on their holidays. And I always thought, if I ever get to talk to a pilot, I'm going to ask them a couple of questions, because one, I don't understand why they don't do it. I prepped you for this one last time, so I hope you got a good answer. Actually, before we get on to that question, you described to me last time that because you're effectively locked in the cockpit of your passenger plane, it's like being on a date with another guy. But because your two guys just sat there until you get to where you're going and you got to land again. You just sat there for 4 hours or however long. Right. And again, I got to stop doing dog walks with Jen before I do podcasts, because she throws up the most ridiculous questions. She wants to know, do you ever find yourself with someone that's just too boring to talk to? And if you do, can you just stick on a podcast or some music or so and just listen to that instead? Or is that deemed to be rather rude?
It's a great question. I've had only a very small handful of trips, and I've been an airline pilot now. I retired from the Navy in 2017 and was lucky enough to be hired by a major airline. So 6 years of flying with many, and you don't fly with the same other pilot. Usually you fly with somebody new, and it's almost like you meet them for the first time. So like you mentioned, it's like going on a 4-day first date with another pilot. You're up there and you talk, and in a very rare instance, the person is just extremely introverted and they just stare out the window and, you ask them a question, try to engage in conversation. They have a one-word answer or don't really want to talk. It's very rare. Usually you find some common ground. And I know we spoke about this before, but 95% of the flight, it's on autopilot. Now we're monitoring what's going on and we're listening to air traffic control. So you get very good at talking about baseball or about running or whatever, golf. If they start talking about golf, I'm the one that starts drooling, looking out the window. But you're talking and having a conversation, but the moment air traffic control says, hey, airliner 123, this is Houston Center, please shift to my frequency 123.7. You're able to you almost can hear two conversations at the same time. And that wasn't my call sign. Okay, I can ignore it and continue to talk about, guns or whatever. So you're talking and you usually can find something, especially if there were another military pilot, you have something in common, maybe another Navy pilot. Oh, maybe there were a tactical, strike fighter aircraft pilot the way I was. And I've flown a few trips with guys that I flew with in Navy, and that was amazing. We had a blast. Yeah, it doesn't happen very often. Now, if it did, I say maybe 2 or 3 flights I've been on where the other person was just adult and didn't have anything to say. It's technically illegal to put on a podcast. You're not supposed to have anything out. And this is an FAA regulation. You can't just put on a movie or put on a Walkman, dating myself, right? Can't put on your earphones and listen to a podcast. That's illegal. Can't have any devices. Can't even have a cell phone switched on in the cockpit. Once you shut the cockpit door, the cell phones are supposed to be switched off. So you can tell Jen that no iPods, no podcasts, but you can almost always find something to talk about.
I do think that just as you say, sticking on your earphones and listening to some, I don't know, dire straits or something might not go down very well with people in charge. Here's my question. My question is a good one. Before we get onto the question I prepped you for, my question is one that's a good example of someone with a tiny bit of knowledge, being a useless thing. So, any plane, no, big or small, I'm guessing actually any plane. Correct me if I'm wrong. If you turn the engines off, it's got a glide ratio where it can glide without its engines on. So. If you you lose your engines at 35,000 feet, that plane isn't dropping out the sky, it's gliding forwards. And I wondered, is there like a point? Because when here's me, I'm on my airplane, I'm in the airplane that I'm flying wherever I'm going on, and sometimes I look on the little map that you get on your little computer screen nowadays, and I think, oh, we're over the ocean now. And I think, well, we are over the ocean, but we're at 35,000 feet. So if we lose both the engines, that's okay. We'll just glide to the nearest land. And then it occurred to me, oh, I wonder if you're ever so far over the ocean that you're too far away to glide from land. I don't know if obviously you are or no, obviously you're not. I can never quite work out. So are there points where you're over the ocean and you couldn't glide to land? And is that even relevant? Is there like a point where you go, oh, we're now at that point?
Yeah. So actually, and this might scare you or some of the listeners, but most of the time, if you're crossing an ocean, you're not in glide distance of any land. If you lose both engines,
I'm scared.
So you're not going to be able to glide to land if you're crossing the Atlantic or the Pacific. But I will tell you that the odds of one engine failing are extremely low. Now, of course, you hear in the news every now and then it does happen. And we train to that all the time, going single engine in the simulator. The odds of that one engine failing are extremely low. And then the odds of the other one also failing at the same time is infinitesimally nearly improbable, almost impossible. Now, everyone's seen the movie Sully, right? Or whatever that movie was called with Sully, who lands in the Hudson River, birds taking off out of Kennedy. He lost both engines because birds flew in both at the same time. So, and he glided it down and landed on the river, which is great. And everyone loves that guy. He did a great job. And would the rest of us be able to do that? I don't know. We don't practice that scenario, the exact scenario that he had. We don't practice that scenario because the odds of that are just so low. But we do practice ditching. Ditching is when you land on the surface, of the water with your engines off. So we do practice that. So if you're going between the UK and say the United States and you had to ditch, they've trained and practiced that procedure of landing on the surface of that ocean, and then all the life rafts and all that stuff, and there's thousands of people instantly know what's going wrong, and everyone's coming to get you right away. It might take a few hours, right? But they all know what's happening. So your odds of survival are probably pretty good there as well. But what I will tell you is we practice for that single engine scenario a lot more because it's much more likely you lose one engine. All of these planes have a certain distance that you can fly on one engine. And that is a number that we are always aware of. And when you go from, say, the UK to New York, from London, Heathrow to JFK, there's a route that you're taking where you've got airfields along the way, Iceland or Greenland, something. You've always got a place. If you go single engine, you're going to go there, right? And you probably could make it all the way to JFK, but why risk it? Right? Why pass up a good runway when if the other engine does fail, now everyone's swimming, and that's not good, right? So as soon as you lose one engine, well, that's a major emergency. You're going to land as soon as you can. And if you're out way over the ocean, you're going to go to the nearest suitable place. And there's always fuel available to go there on one engine, plus some extra fuel to take a couple extra landings. Or if the weather's bad, maybe you have to go yet to another place. That is all factored in when they build the flight plan for that particular flight. So there are many, many people thinking about that at all times. So that should be reassurance, I hope, for you and for your listeners that you're going to be okay. Even if they lose one engine, they're going to make it somewhere and very safely land. And we practice that all the time in the simulator.
That's cool. I did wonder. I've often looked at a little map and thought there is just nothing but blue under this little place. Yeah. Are we? The way I imagined it was my house. There's a petrol station near my house. It's the bottom of a hill. And when I'm running real low on petrol or gas to use, there'll be a moment where I get close enough to that petrol station and traveling at enough speed where I think I'm okay now. It doesn't matter because I can roll to the petrol station. And I wondered if you guys have we're okay now. We can always roll into JFK. But now I know that you can get everywhere on one engine. I'm less worried. Here's my main question. Last time I was on a flight, where was I? I was coming back from Egypt, and as we were flying over a mountain range, I think, it was choppy. The turbulence was I say bad. Not that bad. In fact, I don't mind it at all because I've seen the pictures on YouTube of planes that have landed, and it looks like that plane's had a home invasion take place inside it, and it still gets down. So I'm telling myself, unless there's whatever vomit on the ceiling of this thing, we're not at the limit of what this plane can handle. And I've seen that incredible footage as well, where they kind of stress test the wings on jets and on passenger jets, and they can bend those things up and down. So I have no concerns about turbulence. If I would almost enjoy it, it's something quite interesting. But I'm one of the few, because on this flight there was an awful lot of people getting really, really stressed. And again, I'm looking at the flight crew and the people handing out I forgot the word last time. I'm showing my 1970s upbringing. Flight attendants, that would be the appropriate term, wouldn't it? Nearly got myself in trouble. So the flight attendants, male and female, they're all happy and joking and talking about what they're doing next week. So I think, okay, again, these guys don't care. We're all good. And it occurred to me when we're bouncing up and down, or at least the second that stops for a moment, because it's happening again soon after, why don't you guys pop over the tannoy, whatever you call it, the radio, and say, hey guys, that was fun, wasn't it? We do this all the time. That's like, no big deal whatsoever. I hope you all enjoyed it. For example, if I have my kids in the car and I'm going over a little humpback bridge, I'll say to my kids, they're old enough now, when they were little, I'd go, whoop-de-woo, we've, don't worry that we just took off. That's just how Daddy drives. Why aren't you guys calming people down a bit more? Why is it just left to me to chuckle at them screaming?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know a really good answer. The airline I work for provides guidance where the captain is supposed to come up, we call it the PA, tell the people what's going on. Like if there's a delay because of this or that, like every 15 minutes, the captain should come over the PA and describe what's happening and what we're trying to do and what we know. And that is supposed to, and the statistics show that if you provide feedback every 15 minutes or so, that keeps everybody happy enough that they'll fill out a good report card for the airline at the end of their trip. Turbulence is something that we're always looking to avoid. And my airline it has its own weather department where they're looking at weather, they're looking at turbulence, gathering data, where's a good ride going to be. They plan our routes to avoid areas of bad turbulence. They plan our routes so that if you're going through an area of bad turbulence, they find the altitude that'll have the least turbulence. And even then, if we experience turbulence rougher than we had expected, we'll come up and talk to air traffic control and say, hey, Houston Center, this is, airline 123. We're getting a pretty rough ride here at flight level, at 27,000 feet. Have you had any reports at 31,000 feet? Is any better up there? And they might get on the horn with all the other planes that are on their little piece of the pie on their radar scope and ask some other pilots, hey, how was it at 31,000 feet? And they'll come back and tell us, hey, airline 123, we just got some reports from your mates at that altitude that it's pretty good up there if you want to try it. And so then we'll climb up to that altitude and find that it's smoother. Maybe we climb up there and it's not smoother. Like, hey, it's no better here. It's actually worse. Can we go back down to 2.7? And so we are actually playing that game a lot. But I agree with you. We don't do a very good job of talking to the people about that. I know what we do is if all of a sudden we know we're about to go into some turbulence because we could see it on our little iPad. We have an area that shows ahead. It's going to, it turns, a frowny face. It's going to turn red up here, which means it might be rough. We know that ahead of time, and we'll call the flight attendants first. Say, hey, listen, in about 10 minutes, it's going to start getting a little rougher. You might want to put the tray tables away because we're always looking out for their safety and, of course, the safety of the passengers. So the flight attendants, put their carts away first, and then we might come up and tell the passengers, hey, we're expecting it to get a little bit rough. We've turned the fasten seatbelt sign back on. Please ensure that you stay seated with your seatbelt firmly fastened. We make those announcements. But I agree with you that maybe we could do a better job of once we're in it, maybe making some blurb about, hey, this isn't dangerous. And as far as I don't know if a plane has ever fallen out of the sky due to turbulence itself. Thousands of planes encounter pretty rough turbulence every year, and some might end up in pretty, with some, vomit on the ceiling, but the plane is still perfectly safe and comes back and lands just fine, right? So no one's in danger just from the turbulence. Now, maybe there's like other weather conditions that are more dangerous, like hail or ice or bad weather, bad visibility where you're trying to land, icing conditions, fog. And those are actually more dangerous than the turbulence. But we probably could come up and explain like, hey, don't worry, it might feel pretty rough, but this is normal. And I think we could probably all agree that we probably should. To answer your question, why don't we? It might be because we're engaged in talking about, golf for the past 2 hours and we don't even notice it that way. Maybe we've already found the best altitude we can find. We're doing the best job that we can as far as avoiding the turbulence, but we're in it. We'll just keep talking about freaking golf because that's what Steve here wants to talk about. So we'll keep talking about bloody golf. And we're just we're not really thinking of it. So we probably should do a better job of that. But I know at our company, they also tell us not to give too many PAs because the reports that we get and everything, big business, everything's driven by numbers and money, right? And we send out surveys after a customer has been on a trip and there's a net promoter score and you get negative feedback if you make too many PAs because it interrupts their movie. And so I think the mindset is say the minimum. We're telling them that we're trying to find the best ride we can. Here we are at 310 and it's a little rough, but it's the best. It's as good as it's going to get. And I think I and my peers do a pretty good job at doing that bit. But then that's probably all we say, because I think in the back of our mind, we're thinking, well, our company doesn't want us to talk too much about it because it's going to interrupt. They're watching Wolf of Wall Street. They got to bone up on that because they haven't seen it in a few years. Or maybe they're watching Top Gun. So we're trying not to interrupt their movie. But I feel for those because I've been a passenger too. Sometimes we ride in the back because it's called a deadhead flight where they're trying to get you from A to B and they don't have room for you in the cockpit. So you're sitting as a passenger. You've seen pilots in uniform back there, right?
Yeah.
I've seen people visibly scared, and they look at me and I'll be like, it's okay, like this is fine. Or if I'm sitting next to someone and they ask me like, this seems terrifying. And I'm like, oh, no, these airplanes are stressed to 5 times this load of, you've seen the wings flapping in the videos. Like this plane can handle 10 times this amount of turbulence before it's even close to an issue. And usually the person sitting next to me is like, oh, okay, well, you're a pilot and you say that. If you're not scared of it, I guess I won't be scared. So we probably should do a better job, right?
That literally what I'm imagining. Funny enough, I'm someone who would be, I wouldn't give you a bad report card, but I'd be thinking, oh, I don't need to hear this because you've just interrupted my movie.
Yeah.
But equally, what I'm imagining, when it does get really rough, actually, funny enough, the last time it was really bad, I was on a flight from Heathrow to JFK. This was a few years ago, and I had my kids with me. And my youngest, who was probably 13 at the time, I think it might have even been his first flight. And he was scared. I mean, the thing was, bouncing about, and he was scared. And in my head, and what I was telling him was, I was saying the guys in the cockpit are probably just still laughing and chatting and talking about nonsense, because to them, this is just like going over like a bumpy road in your car. And also, shut up because I'm trying to watch a movie. So that calmed him down. But I just thought, if the guys up front are just, as you say, or the girls up front are just being quite blasé about it, it would be really cool if they kind of told us, by the way, we didn't mention anything because we were too busy talking about golf. That would just make people at the back think, okay, well, if they're rabbiting on about golf, we probably aren't about to fall out of the sky. So there you go. Next time your plane feels like it's shaking itself to bits, just tell people this is exciting.
Will do.
The last thing I want to talk about, and it's good to bring this stuff back to sport and fitness, given what I do, which is pretend to do some sport and fitness now and again. I'm interested in what you're doing, because you are, if correct me if I'm wrong, you're 51 years of age. Is that right?
Correct.
Cool. So you're a year older than me, and your kids are getting into sport. What are you doing sport wise now? Because I have so many people listen to the YouTube channel in particular, and they say to me, "Oh, it's really annoying because I'm 45 and 46, and it's all over. I'm done. There's nothing else I can do physically." I think, what are you talking about? And then equally, I get people that are 65, 75 saying they're still doing any form of physical activity, and it just inspires me. So I think it's great to hear when people are doing stuff a little bit older than average.
Yeah, I started in high school. I found that distance running was my strength, and so I started running track, cross country, indoor track. That was my thing, and I was I would say well above average high school athlete. It helped, I think, get me into the Naval Academy, and I ran a bit at Navy, and I'd always run. In my younger career, running, there was no formal process. There was no formal training. And I think in society there was less formalized, training for that kind of stuff even back then. But I would run a race every now and then just for the heck of it, because maybe some squadron mates wanted to sign up for this 5K or this 10K or whatever. Oh, sure, maybe run for a couple weeks extra hard and get ready for it. And I would do that. And I was always pretty good just because running was my background. And then I started getting into some adventure racing, like mountain biking especially. Love mountain biking. Like, that's a lot of fun. I know you've done a bit of that. I got really into mountain biking, and that started yielding, parlayed into multi-sport adventure races, some Spartan races, some off-road triathlons. So now I had to kind of learn how to swim again, a lot of mountain biking. And then that gave way to road triathlon, because I don't live in a place that has great mountain biking. So I discovered I was driving several hours every week just to get to some below average mountain bike trails. It was a can't beat them, join them mindset, where I'm like, I guess if I'm driving all this much, I'm wasting time. I need to, I guess, get a road bike, even though it didn't seem that appealing. And I still don't enjoy road biking all that much, especially here, because the roads are kind of dangerous. There's no bike lanes. It's not great in my area. But I was like, but I like the sport and I love the races. So I got into triathlon. This is about the time I was a weapons school instructor. So I'm a lieutenant. I'm a mid-grade lieutenant. I'm single. I was not married with kids. So I was big into triathlon for a bit. And I got fairly serious about it. I think 2006. That's actually after I got married. I had my son was very young, but I was very serious that year, 2006. Coincidentally, that's the year that we brought the F-14s back from deployment. Those were retired. I started switching into the F-18. That was the year that I hired a coach online, and I got the Navy sponsored me for triathlon for that year. And I did a couple half Ironman races were my big events. I think I did like 12 or 13 races that year. But then I realized that I'm putting my life at risk on a bike around where I live in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I had a second child, and I'm spending more time with my kids. And I'm like, I'm probably going to get hit and killed one of these days riding my bike so much. So I started backing out of the triathlon scene pretty much altogether. And throughout my life, running has always been this underlying theme, but I was never dedicated per se. I think during my second deployment to Afghanistan, I got back into running a lot. So I ran quite a bit in theater in Afghanistan. It's good because high elevation, so blood cell count different. It was beneficial. I came back and had my PR in the half marathon after my last deployment to Afghanistan. So I got back into running a bit. Then I retired from the Navy, started doing this airline gig. I would go run, on my time off, and then I go have a pint, and a meal with the other pilot. And again, wasn't very serious about it. It wasn't until, and I have a son now who's 18, a daughter who's 16, and a daughter who's 12. But my middle child, my daughter, who's now 16, year ago, she started running for her school and did very well, which was cool because my wife was a distance runner in college, and we're like, aha, she's got our distance, our cardio dolphin gene, right? Yeah. So she did well at running, and she's always, all three of her kids are swimmers. They do swim team. She did very well at swimming. After her swim season, she's like, Dad, I've done pretty well at running and swimming. Should I try a triathlon? And I said, yes. So I got online and found a used bike, and inexpensive because it was old, but it worked great. Got her a bike. We did a race. And so she's like, I want to do this. So we signed up for a race. It was a sprint distance triathlon. This was last fall. So I signed up with her because I'm like, I'm not going to let this poor girl go out there and do it by herself. So I signed like, yeah, I'll do it with you just, to provide some moral support. Right. And then of course the older brother couldn't be outdone. He's like, oh, if my sister's doing it, I better sign up too. So the three of us signed up for this race, and I started training very seriously. I gave up donuts and dessert for the whole summer, and I started training on my own, but I'd been in a triathlon, so I kind of knew how to make my own little training plan, and got, I would say, fairly serious on 15-year-old bicycles. Of course, my old stuff was very antiquated and falling apart, but Amazon kept a couple of parts topped off, and there we go. So we did this race, and my daughter did great. My son did pretty well. He's a beast of a swimmer. And I did well. I think I got second in my age group out of like 13. So by your standards, above average. I think there was 400 finishers. I was like in the top 30. I was pleased. I'm like, I'm because of my daughter, I have rekindled my burning desire to get back into this. So, and partially because of your YouTube channel, I was inspired to take training, not to the X level where you're, staring at the peak of Mount Everest and you're right below it and trying to get to the peak. I have acknowledged in my own mind that that's not the level I want to get to, but I want to get, if I'm going to spend 2 hours a day exercising, I may as well do it correctly, efficiently, and so I don't get injured. So I hired a coach where I'm going with this. So now I have a triathlon coach. We've signed up for a couple more races for the spring and the fall. I'm doing some Olympic distance races as my goal this year. Those are double the distance of a sprint. So I've rediscovered my love of triathlon, and that's where I am in that journey. In fact, I just got out of the pool an hour before stepping on here with you. So every day I'm doing 1 or 2 training sessions, maybe an hour and a half, nothing crazy. Yesterday was like a 9.5 mile run, hour, an 80-minute run, various paces. And the coach she's a professional triathlete, so she knows what she's doing. So they're great workouts, and I feel great. I feel more alive than I did, a year or 2 ago, where I was randomly doing runs here and there, randomly getting hurt because maybe I wouldn't run for a week or 2. Then I go off and do a 7-mile run at like 7-minute pace, and then my calves would be, strained for like 2 weeks. My wife's like, "You're an idiot. Like, you don't train consistently. Of course you're going to hurt yourself, and you're 51 freaking years old." So I took with some of her advice, and then my coach, like, hey, take a slow approach at first and build yourself up to the point now where I'm doing workouts where I'm pushing hard, but I'm able to handle it. And I owe all this mostly to my daughter for getting me back interested, in the sport. So I feel great. I feel like I got a lot of energy. I have something to look forward to. I'm not on my airline trips. Even when I'm on my airline trips, I can do a lot of my run training while I'm on a layover somewhere. And then all my biking and swimming, I do while I'm at home, not on a trip. And most of my biking right now is on Zwift. And again, a lot of that is because I was purely entertained by you falling off your Zwift. I replayed that many times. I'm like, if that guy can do it, I can. And, I got the Wahoo kicker bike and got plugged into the Zwift thing, and I'm doing all my bike on that in the garage, and I love it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, the two cool things I take from that is it's cool that at 51 you're better than you were at 50. I think that's such an important thing that so many people think Well, they either get fixated on how good they were when they're in their 20s and their 30s, and they get hung up on that, and you have to let that go. That's water under the bridge, or
Right.
they just look at, especially looking at other. I mean, for example, if I judged what I might be able to do by looking at my friends who are my age, I'd check into an old people's home tomorrow. I'd assume that was the standard. So it's good that people can hear that yeah, there are plenty of people out there who are thinking, I'm 50, but I'll be better next year. I'll be even better the year after that. I mean, there is a point where there is a natural tapering off of your ability, but if you're fit and healthy, there's no reason why at 50 you can't be better as you are, better at 51. And the other cool thing as well, doing stuff with your kids when your kids are becoming adults is I found absolutely so cool to do. I mean, I had a really weird kind of timing because when my kids were quite young, I was really out of shape. And then when my kids were teenagers, I was kind of, they've almost had a kind of a reaction against me doing, their dad being a YouTube fitness kind of guy, that almost pushed them away from fitness a little bit. I remember one of my middle one, my middle kid, Josh, I remember him mentioning that he'd just turned 18 and he joined Tinder to try and get a date. And he's swiping away through girls, and some girl saw his picture and he'd appeared on one of my videos. And Mark Lewis is my middle name. It's not my surname. So I use Mark Lewis for YouTube. So he's on Tinder using his surname, our surname. And so she doesn't get the Lewis thing. She sees him and she texts him and says, hey, we've matched on Tinder. I saw you on a Mark Lewis video. That's incredible. How do you know Mark Lewis? And so that kind of sums up why my kids rebelled against anything to do with fitness, because I'm me. But what's interesting is the older one, who's now 23, has just got almost back into fitness because he's thinking I'm 23 and I don't want to be what my dad was when I was 23, which was really out of shape. So I'm working out with him and we're doing high rocks together and stuff. And it is, it's more fun in a way than I've ever had with my kids in a sporting context, because when they were little, you take them to soccer practice or whatever, and there's that. But that's not, that's a weird one because you're kind of living through them a little bit that's going on. And they're not doing anything to necessarily a great standard because they're 8 years old, and what can they do? But now, I'm having just a huge amount of fun. So I guess the same thing for you. We're training with them. I mean, how cool is that?
Yeah, it's really cool. It's the point. My daughter thinks she wants to do this in college, so she's starting research colleges and which ones have triathlon as a varsity sport, and maybe if she becomes good enough at parts of these events that she could be recruited and that could help pay for her university, which would be cool. So yeah, she does all her swim training is with her swim teams. And then running, she's the same thing running. So that leaves us to bike together. So she's going to get a Zwift account, she says, this summer, and we'll learn about Zwift. And then we will do some road biking together. And then we'll do the races together, which will be a lot of fun. She doesn't like running with me. And I don't know if it's because there's a competitive thing. She's probably faster than me. I don't even know. I don't care. Like, I'm sure you have the same, you want them to be faster than you. You want to pass on that torch. It doesn't matter to me if she's is or isn't, but in her mind she's like, I don't want to go with my old man because maybe she's embarrassed that she isn't faster, or maybe she knows that she is faster than me and doesn't want to embarrass me. I don't know. I don't care. I would just love to go out running there. But every time I ask her, hey, let's go, I only have like a 6 minute or a 6 mile workout today. You want to go? No, I'm gonna do my own later, is what I always hear. I'm like, oh man, I wish I could just go, but maybe I'll crack that egg at some point, but I haven't figured that one out yet.
It's a fun one because
but it is a fun journey.
Yeah, well, maybe it's a boys thing because I'm doing it with my son, and there is a. I mean, I am at the moment. I am bigger, faster, stronger than him. I mean, just I am, and I won't be, and I'm really quite excited about not being. It's an interesting one,
right?
Because a lot of people, a lot of dads. Yeah, once they're into their 50s, their kids are moving into their 20s. Their kids do surpass them physically. So we got this slightly odd situation where I'm doing all right at 50. So we're kind of waiting, like it's going to be in the next 4 or 5 years. he'll be whatever 25, I'll be mid-50s, and there'll be this really fun dynamic where we're suddenly 30 years apart, but also on a level together. I'm really looking forward to it. No, I love it. I'm training with my kids. I mean, any parent that is wondering, is it worth getting in shape, and they're looking at their 10-year-old, I absolutely guarantee you, in 10 years' time, when you're able to do stuff with that 20-year-old, because you're still in shape, there is nothing like it. I mean, running, cycling, whatever with your kids, and showing them as well what can be done, because it's so easy when you're 18, 19 to think fitness is just a few years and then it's life, and it's clearly it's not. So just awesome to hear that you're doing all that stuff. I've had an awesome time. I could talk to you for far too long about all things Top Gun, but there'd come a point where even the most ardent fan would just think, shut up and wrap this up. So I'm going to we are going to finish though with a tradition that starts today, because you're our first podcast for season 2, which is where a guest gets to pick from 2 films of my choosing that are relevant to their topic of conversation we've just had. For you, it's Iron Eagle or Wings of the Apache.
Oh, God. Well, Iron Eagle was terrible. I don't think I've ever seen Wings of the Apache. I guess I would have to go with Iron Eagle, even though it's dreadful.
Well, I
don't even know I've never heard of Wings of the Apache.
Haven't you? Okay. Well, I got a treat for you coming up then. In terms of you go off and find it. Iron Eagle. I wondered actually when you were talking earlier about your Air Force buddies who have the cool call signs. I wonder if they kind of got hard done by with their plane movie. So in a way, you have to kind of let them have the cool signs, because their movie sucks. Although I do remember as a kid riding my bike with my Walkman strapped to my thigh, playing Queen soundtracks, pretending I was in Iron Eagle. And Wings of the Apache is an epic Apache helicopter film, as you can imagine, starring Nicolas Cage and Tommy Lee Jones, of all people. So
man, all right, I'll have to look that one up.
So Wings of the Apache, go check them out. And you probably picked right. I mean, sticking on Queen One Vision before doing your bombing runs is really the only way to complete them.
Hey, Mark, can I break protocol? Can I ask you 2 questions?
Yeah,
I'm not going to put you on the spot, but your listeners might enjoy this.
Do it, yeah.
Great. The first one's easy. The second one will be a little more depth of it. The first one: why are your dogs named after dead U.S. presidents?
Point Break. We stole that. We stole that from the movie Point Break, where obviously the surfers dress up as dead presidents. So they are. That's it. They Lincoln, Jefferson, and Nixon, and the next one's going to be Reagan. We don't have Reagan yet. That's when one of our dead presidents is a dead dog. Reagan will be the next one. That's what's lined up, and maybe Carter. I've got Reagan and Carter. Yeah,
great. I'd always wondered that. All right, cool. The second one, and I know the answer, I think, and this might be a little bit of a rabbit hole, and I know you do not like swimming. I've seen a video where you made that crystal clear. Yeah. Why would anybody do that? But the question is, why won't you try one triathlon? Go ahead, and I might have a rebuttal for you.
There's 2 parts to it. The slightly boring, and I'll be careful what I say so I don't get sued, part is that I signed up to do an Ironman, and I was fully into it. I mean, I wanted the logo on the calf and all that. I wanted to do it, and it was during COVID that it was supposed to take place, and it didn't happen. And Ironman moved the date, and I couldn't make the one they moved it to, and they said pretty much tough, and I lost a lot of money, lost hundreds of pounds because I couldn't move it through no fault of my own. In fact, there was actually a court case in the States where a lot of people during the COVID issue took Ironman to court over kind of losing fees, and it didn't go in anyone's favour. It went in Ironman's favour, basically. So having lost money to Ironman, I wouldn't do an Ironman, and I'm glad I didn't get a tattoo, because had I done, I'd have had to remove my leg. So that was good. Now, people have said there are other triathlons, so I could do another triathlon, and that does just come down to swimming. I was a lifeguard because people keep saying to me, "Oh, I'll teach you to swim," as though I can't swim. I can. I'm a good swimmer. My mum swam for the country. My mum was a coach. I can swim. I was a lifeguard. I swam for my local club when I was a kid, and I just hated it. I just swam the swimming out of me. So by the time I got to about 20, I was just done with it. I can't get in a pool now and do more than 2 lengths without just thinking, I just want to get out. I also have a slight shark phobia, even in swimming pools, which people don't quite understand. But I mean, if you don't understand, I can't help you. I do worry about sharks in swimming pools, which is a Dr. No problem, James Bond. That terrified me of sharks in pools. So no, yeah, it really just comes down. I just hate swimming. I love duathlons. I do. I love the idea. I really enjoy the transitional element of, maybe it's why I like high rocks. I love the idea of jumping off of one thing and jumping onto something else. Yeah, if I'm doing a duathlon, throwing the bike down and just running out, I love it. I absolutely love it. But I hate swimming. I mean, yeah.
Yep, I hear you.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying, and swimming, it for me is the weakest link for sure. I will tell you, with a training plan and a coach, I have learned to like swimming a lot better, simply because the workouts she gives me, it's not just, oh, go swim 2,500 meters today. It's chopped up into, oh, do this, 50 at this pace, do 100 at this pace, then 15 seconds of rest. It breaks it up, and that makes it a lot more interesting, and for me, more fun, because I'm a metrics numbers geek, and you have to hit these numbers, so I enjoy that part of it. So for me, that makes it a little more interesting and bearable, because I don't enjoy the swim portion of the race either. But I will tell you, watching your video about high rocks and how I think it's the jump burpees, right? That
your dog,
you're not.
Your dog is wearing clothes there, Stuff. I don't know if you're aware that your dog's got dressed for the podcast.
Yeah, I think my wife did that on purpose to embarrass me on film. He's carrying his rope, right? And he's not named after a dead president.
He doesn't have a little hat he could put on for us, does he?
Good Lord. No, but the jump burpees, I remember you describing how you dislike that portion of the race, but you're glad that that's in the race because it adds to the overall feel and vibe of the race. And that's the way I feel about the swim in a triathlon. When I'm standing there on the beach waiting for the starting gun to go off, I'm like, I suck at the swim. I get kicked in the face 50 times and I can't breathe quite right after the first 5 minutes. I just want to get the swim over with. I was a triathlete for a while, and now I'm getting back into it. And I still kind of had that vibe at my last race. I think I'm getting a little better now with just coaching. But I will say, after every race, and I'm done with the whole thing, I'm like, that whole thing was amazing. And getting through the swim helped make the overall event that much more enjoyable. And that's exactly what you described, the burpee jumps, for high rocks. I would beg you to give it just one try. Sign up for one sprint and see if you don't feel that same experience that I do.
Oh, well, the two things that spring to mind. First of all, burpees take me 4 minutes. If the swim in triathlon was 4 minutes, I'm there. I'm there with bells on. Having said that, having been asked to give it a go by a TOPGUN instructor, I almost feel compelled to consider it at least.
Just one. Do one, and then we'll talk after that.
I will give it some thought.
Sure.
Cool. But before you sign me up for anything else, let's call it. Let's call it quits. Again, thank you for your time. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Yep, been a pleasure here. Hopefully, do it again someday.
Look forward to it. Cheers now.
All right, take care. Cheers.